And now I've asked Ryan to kind of think about, again, she's from the the Regional Planning Commission here on Cape Cod. Where does she see, or where does the commission see challenges as opportunities in terms of planning for sea level rise, what they've already been thinking about, things they've already tried to do, and do you need some help with that?
The newest one isn't there.
Okay.
I'm just going to grab it real quick. Wow, what a day. I'm sure everyone's a little bit fried. So I will try to get through this pretty quickly. Again, I'm Ryan Christenberry. I'm a regional land use planner with the Cape Cod Commission. What I'm hoping to do today is to introduce you to some of the regional planning tools that we have available to us that are actually quite powerful given the uniqueness of the Cape Cod Commission as a regional planning and regulatory agency. I think everything today has been at times a bit grim, but I think that there are opportunities in what we can do locally. So as we've heard a lot about, the Cape's coastline is subject to highly variable and quite natural the phenomenon of erosion, but climate change impacts, including sea level rise, increased frequency of storms, et cetera, will dramatically change our coastline here. Our responses to that typically fall into 4 categories: armoring, accommodating, elevating, and retreating. Just out of curiosity, anyone know where that middle picture is from? Yeah, I think that's a great example of accommodating high water, just to point that out. A lot of people ask questions about what the difference is between accommodating and elevating, but unfortunately the Verizon truck probably didn't think that. I've pulled this from the 2007 IPCC synthesis report just to touch on the adaptation strategies that are obviously not new at this point to anyone for this region. We've talked a lot about relocation, seawalls, conservation of marshland and upland, the constraints and opportunities associated with that, both financial and technological barriers to implementing some of those policies. But what I really wanted to highlight here is that in terms of the policy framework, climate change considerations, particularly sea level rise for our region, should be a component of everything that we do on the land use side of things. Both our land use policies, our building design policies, infrastructure planning efforts, it should run the gamut. What I want to primarily touch on is, as I said, the Commission's tools. Not all of these are exclusively ours, but the tools that I think have a powerful opportunity to contribute adaptation strategies and help promote resilience to the problem here. The FEMA multi-hazard mitigation plans, that is obviously a FEMA tool. The Commission has been in charge of facilitating the county plan for the past 2 cycles now. The first plan was developed in 2004. In 2009, we embarked on an update of that plan. It's both a regional and a local plan. They require FEMA certification. The framework for is primarily geared towards minimizing damage from natural hazards through a risk and vulnerability assessment, a corresponding mitigation strategy, and then developing action items. Certified plans allow you access to implementation grant funding. And we used it in 2009 as a framework to begin to address adaptation planning. We were a little, I think, outside of our element when we were trying to do this. Tana was a part of the group that was trying to use this framework to address adaptation planning. And one real challenge for us was the underlying data points. You know, what's the rate of sea level rise that you plan for, or what's the best case climate projection scenario or worst case climate projection scenario that you try to plan for. Also considering these are 5-year plans. They're updated every 5 years, so it's more of an adaptive approach. And then having things like LiDAR data, that was a critical piece of understanding how these changes will morph into adaptation strategies. So we didn't realize a lot of progress in that effort, but we've been encouraged to see that FEMA recently released an adaptation policy stating that all of their work going forward will involve some form of adaptation planning, including the hazard mitigation plans. Another tool that we have is the Cape Cod Commission's Regional Policy Plan. It's a planning and regulatory document that establishes goals, policies, and standards to guide planning. It identifies and maps resources of regional concern and imposes minimum performance standards for developments of regional impact. The coastal resources section is just one section in the RPP that addresses hazard mitigation. There are, I think, about 11 performance standards within that section. And we're proposing to expand that section in the revision of the RPP in 2014 to include processes for sediment management plans. The Regional Land Use Vision Map is another collaborative effort between the Commission and towns. It encourages mixed use and compact development in existing centers and discourages sprawl in other areas. Centers that are approved for higher DRI thresholds can develop without Commission review, and correspondingly areas that are designated as resource protection areas can lower their development thresholds. The brown that you see on the map here for each town is the resource protection area layer that's a part of that mapping process, and it includes slush and AV zones. And if you don't see your town there, talk to your planning board. There are about 9 Cape towns that have adopted a land use vision map, so there's a few more to go. The DCPC tool, or District of Critical Planning Concern, is a very powerful tool. It's also often controversial. It involves a moratorium on development to allow for a planning process to ensue. It's about a year-long moratorium to develop regulations and standards for the special or unique sensitive resources within that district that are defined through the designation. There are, I believe, 9 DCPCs designated. The area, that's the darker purple that you see. The large purple area surrounding the Cape is the Ocean DCPC, which was designated about a year and a half ago in response to the state's ocean management plan. The ocean management plan allowed new uses within the ocean waters surrounding Cape Cod, particularly wind energy development and sand and gravel mining for beach nourishment purposes. The Commission declared the DCPC so that we could develop standards and regulations for managing that new allowed use within the district. Growth incentive zones are another tool that concentrate growth in areas with adequate infrastructure to serve that growth. And again, reducing development potential outside the zone. It's an opportunity to revitalize village centers and downtowns and gain higher DRI thresholds while also conserving land outside the district. It's a growth neutral policy. Some of the model bylaws that we work with, and probably most importantly for our discussion here today, is the Coastal Floodplain Development Bylaw. One of its authors is actually here in the audience, so he could probably answer questions about that if you have any, far better than I could. Our Open Space Residential Cluster Development Bylaw and Wetlands and Wildlife Habitat Bylaws are all model tools that can be used to amend or adapt local ordinances for greater protection in these areas. We've recently collaborated with the Volpe Center for a climate change and transportation and land use scenario planning effort. That study is currently available. The Seashore was also a partner with us on that project. And we're currently undergoing a regional wastewater management planning process. Some of you may be very familiar with that. Climate change considerations are a critical component of that plan, given the infrastructure requirement of what we need to do. We unfortunately don't have very much wastewater infrastructure here on the Cape, and we need to build more, but hopefully we won't build it on barrier beaches. And the RPP, again, in the next round of updates, we're working to develop a marine resources section that will look at sediment management planning on both a local level and a regional level. Local tools that some of you are very familiar with are the local comprehensive plans They define the town's vision for achieving the goals of the RPP, and they articulate the town's growth policy. They're typically certified by the Cape Cod Commission and can inform long-range zoning and planning discussions. And one recommendation that we have as towns come to us about to engage in an LCP update process is, rather than incorporate climate change thinking and considerations as a chapter at the back of your plan, it should be a lens by which you consider every aspect of your LCP as you develop it going forward. Rolling easements are essentially just a concept that I wanted to touch on. This is nothing new, but there's a great primer that's out through the Climate Ready Estuaries program of the EPA that talks about rolling easements in terms of their ability to inform adaptation planning responses. They're actually not easements, interestingly enough. They're conservation restrictions or restrictive covenants or various other land restriction deeds that allow for the ultimate assumption that land will give way to the rising sea, but that uses can continue to a certain extent until that time comes. They are both voluntary and regulatory approaches, and I've included just a couple of examples here. Across the country, Worcester County, Maryland has had a voluntary program in place since 1997. The South Carolina Beachfront Management Act addressed the takings claims issue with rolling easements. And then the California Coastal Act has an offer to dedicate. It's a mitigation exaction tool that they use to preserve public access, et cetera, in coastal development projects. I tried to be as quick as I could, so that's it.
Thank you, Ryan. Hope you weren't squeezed too much. Any immediate questions for Ryan? Go ahead and start, David.
This is David Dow. The Cape Cod Commission is often emphasized regional approaches, whether it's for wastewater or solid waste. What kind of incentives can the Commission provide to towns to get greater buy-in?
That's a good question. Some of the tools that I mentioned, such as the growth incentive zones, there's a density bonus associated with that. If you do the proper planning and do the downzoning outside of the area and can show that you have the infrastructure to support the development that you'd like, the Commission being out of the way is often an incentive for towns, not having us hanging over you reviewing every project, as well as getting a density bonus for it too. So that's one instance. I'll have to think of another, but evading Commission review is often enough of an incentive on its own. I'm not supposed to say that, but.
Jim?
How many communities have adopted all or part of the Model Coastal Floodplain Bylaw in their comprehensive plans? Follow-up question, how many have actually implemented it on the ground level, so to speak?
As far as I know, none, aside from Chatham, which was one of the originators that informed the development of that bylaw, as I understand it. I'm not sure why that's the case. Maybe we need a coastal resources specialist at the Commission again. We're currently without one, but yeah, unfortunately none to this point, other than Chatham.
I think the regional policy plan standards, some of them actually capture some of the visions in the model.
They do. They do. They don't have to adopt those. Developments of regional impact, anything that triggers our review, has to adhere to those in any sort of coastal development where those standards would apply. Towns that are updating their local comprehensive plans, we require them to be consistent with the goals of the RPP, but not necessarily the standards. Of course, we encourage them to adopt measures that are consistent with the standards as well, but it's really more goal-oriented.
All right, well, I don't see any other hands, so thank you very much, Ryan, again. Well, with that, I think we're gonna close the program for today, knowing that you had a chance to pull in some questions, what your opinions were of certain things. I want to thank all the speakers who came from both the morning and the afternoon. Everybody did an outstanding job, and I hope that you've left with a better understanding of this issue, sea level rise, some more impetus for why we need to really kind of get into seriously planning for this, opportunities for where we can start doing that, even just biting off small things, knowing who some resources that you can dig into for further information, as well as some experts and people who are very knowledgeable and working on this all the time, who are both in the audience as well as who spoke today. And if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to email me. I think all my contact information is in there, and I'll send out a follow-up email with where you can find the archived resources from today, as well as the video that will come out. So thank you again. Have a wonderful afternoon.